Hello and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Jahnke. Today we are talking about 3 must-draft fantasy football players. While it's exceptionally rare to have a true must-draft player, these are 3 players I find myself constantly drafting, regardless of what my draft strategy has been to that point, what my team needs are. The value is just too good on these 3 players that I find myself drafting them over and over. But before I jump into those 3 players, I first want to remind you to subscribe if you haven't already. Subscriptions go a long way to helping us, and they also help make sure that you do not miss an episode that I have, or John and I have, or John has. So definitely make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And then I also want to let you know that right now we have a great deal going on at PFF.com right now for PFF Plus. Right now we have our early bird special going on. So just $79.99 for the year. That's $40 off for a PFF Plus subscription. That gets you access to my rankings. That gets you access to all of my articles, as well as a bunch of other tools for fantasy in terms of the mock draft simulator, the live draft assistant. Also gets you access to our premium stats, so stats that you can't find anywhere else, grades that you can't find anywhere else, and that's all for $79.99 for the year. That's going to be the best deal that you'll find. That's a PFF early bird deal, which ends on August 7th. Just go to subscribe.pff.com and use code earlybird, or if you go to my social media, you'll find the link there, or if you go to pff.com, you'll find that everywhere. Now jumping into my 3 must-draft fantasy football players. The first player on the list is Chris Olave, someone that we know has top 15 fantasy talent at wide receiver. He is someone who's had a 25% target rate over the past 3 seasons, which is 8th best among wide receivers, 2.21 yards per route run, which is 9th best. So, and a lot of the most important metrics that you can find for a wide receiver. He has been in the top 10. Scored the 16th most fantasy points in 2023. PFF grade has been at least 82 each of his past 3 seasons, so he has played very well. And then he should have a boost this season because Kellen Moore is the new head coach. Moore has had slot receivers be very successful in his time as a head coach for fantasy purposes. They've scored between 15 and 22 PPR points per game. The outside receivers haven't had much success, and Olave is the wide receiver for the Saints. That makes the most sense to put in the slot. He has more yards per route run in the slot compared to out wide. And when you compare that to the other wide receivers the Saints have, they are more successful on the outside compared to the slot. For example, Rashid Shaheed, 2.27 yards per route run when lined up out wide compared to 1.49 in the slot. So Moore has had successful offenses that have run a lot of plays, and offenses that have run through the slot receiver. So Olave should have a lot of success there. Obviously, there are some concerns with Olave as well. Has 5 documented concussions that cost him most of last season. So if he does suffer another concussion, that'll probably cost him significant time. So there is risk when drafting Olave. But luckily, the wide receiver position is so deep that you can draft other wide receivers that can fill Olave's spot if he does suffer an injury. You're drafting Olave more so for his upside, that you can get him at a wide receiver 3 cost right now. But as long as he's playing, he should at least be a wide receiver 2 with the potential to be even better if him playing in the slot unlocks even more potential that we haven't seen yet. And then there's also the concern about the quarterback situation, but we have also seen plenty of wide receivers play with subpar quarterbacks and still have plenty of success for fantasy football purposes. It's not like Chris Olave has had the greatest quarterbacks in the world the past couple seasons, and Olave has found plenty of success with them. So I'm not all that concerned about the quarterback situation, even though it's not ideal. So I definitely would want to draft Olave and still draft other wide receivers, but you can get him at that wide receiver 3 price. And as long as he is healthy, you can plug him into your starting lineup and get better value compared to his ADP. The second player that I want to jump into is Jordan Mason, the new running back for the Minnesota Vikings. He has been excellent in his first 3 seasons as a backup for the San Francisco 49ers, top quarter of the league in terms of PFF rushing grades over the past 3 years, among those with at least 200 carries. So he has been a very successful runner. His yards per attempt is excellent in almost every single situation you can think of: gap runs, zone runs, perfectly blocked runs, non-perfectly blocked runs. He has found success several different ways, and that translated to fantasy success early last season when he was the starter when Christian McCaffrey was out. Scored the 6th most fantasy points over the first 5 weeks of the 2024 season. Then he started dealing with injuries. Then McCaffrey was back, and then he dealt with more injuries. But in his short time as a starter, he was very successful from a fantasy perspective. Now he's with the Minnesota Vikings, where he is expected to share time with Aaron Jones, but I think he can have a pretty clear split in terms of playing time with Jones. Jones is the better receiving running back. I could see Jones playing a lot on third downs and other passing situations, but I expect Jordan Mason to become the running back that's playing the most in rushing situations. While Aaron Jones has been a successful runner throughout his career, he has slowed down a little bit, and it makes sense that they want to have a committee. We've seen Mason be a lot more explosive as a runner recently. Mason has gained at least 15 rushing yards on 8% of his carries last season, and that's compared to 4% by Aaron Jones. And Jones was also at 4% the year before that. So I expect Mason to be the more explosive runner. He is also the bigger runner, so expect him to be getting a lot of the goal line touches. And a lot with Mason is the Minnesota Vikings should have an extremely successful offense. JJ McCarthy has the opportunity to bring the offense to a level that we haven't seen since we've seen what Kirk Cousins does with the Vikings and not with the Vikings. We've seen what Sam Darnold does with the Vikings and not with the Vikings. We've seen this offense really elevate the quarterback. So McCarthy even could be a below average quarterback and the offense could be successful because we've seen that time and time again at quarterback. And the Vikings have done other things to help the offense. And that includes completely reworking the interior of the offensive line. Now, basically all 5 players on the offensive line have a high positive run block grade rate. And those are the things that help spring long runs. So Mason should be able to continue having a lot of long runs behind this Minnesota offensive line. This is also a team that should be scoring a lot of points. And because of that, Mason should be getting a lot of those goal line carries. We also saw earlier this week in training camp when they were doing fully padded practices, it was reported that Mason was the player getting the first carry with the first team offense. So Mason is already working his way into a clear role in that first team offense. Right now, he is getting drafted outside of the top 30 running backs in most places, and he is someone that definitely has the upside to be a top 24 fantasy running back. And if he takes a high majority of the carries away from Aaron Jones and starts catching the ball a little more than what we saw in San Francisco, his upside is even higher to be a top 10 running back, even if Aaron Jones keeps the third down role and the 2-minute drill role. So Mason, I think, has sky high potential. I think his ADP will slowly but surely be rising as more of these reports come out of training camp, as we see him play in the preseason. So I think he is in a position where his ADP will be on the rise, but the sooner that you can get him and the sooner you can add him to your team, the better off your fantasy team will be. The last must-draft player I want to go over today is Dalton Kincaid, someone who was drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. In his rookie season, he had a stretch of games where he was averaging 14 PPR points per game in the middle of the season, which included 2 games where he had at least 80 receiving yards. That is excellent from a fantasy perspective, and if he did that all the time, he'd be a clear top 4 fantasy tight end. But last year was a bit of a forgettable season. Only scored 2 touchdowns and never exceeded 55 receiving yards. But there were a lot of problems going on that I don't expect to be problems this season. First is he had the 3rd most uncatchable targets for a tight end, which also had the 34% uncatchable target rate, which was the 2nd highest rate among tight ends. I think a lot of that had to do with his injuries, and in general, his play last season, I felt a lot had to do with injuries. We've seen multiple reports throughout this offseason from the general manager, from various coaches in Buffalo, that a lot of his problems last year had to do with injury, and that probably impacted his route running, impacted his chemistry with Josh Allen. But it sounds like he is more healthy now. The coaches have said he has his confidence back, so I am willing to forgive last season and what happened then. And I think a big part of it is with Allen and how successful he is at quarterback. He's also someone who doesn't always throw to his first read, so that should also help if other wide receivers are covered. But last year, he had an ADP of tight end 5 because we expected a jump from him. And right now he's getting drafted much lower than that, closer to tight end 14. And I think if he just didn't play with his injuries last year, we would still consider him a top 10 fantasy tight end. But the fact that he played through his injuries has left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. So that's lowering his ADP. And I don't think we should be penalizing players who are playing through an injury compared to those who don't play through an injury. So I think that's very important to consider with Kincaid. I don't think a lot of people, when drafting Kincaid, are taking that into consideration. So that's really helping his ADP. I think he's someone where if you wait for a tight end, I would be happy to draft him and another tight end. And even if you do get a tight end early, I typically advocate if you get one of the top players like Brock Bowers or Trey McBride and George Kittle, you probably don't need a backup fantasy tight end. But if Kincaid's available to you at ADP, he is still someone I'd be considering drafting. And then if he does have this season that I expect, then you can either trade him or trade the tight end that you drafted early and help yourself at a different position where you wouldn't be able to find that value at running back or a wide receiver this late in fantasy drafts. So that covers it for my top 3 must-draft fantasy football players this year. Again, the players that I find myself constantly drafting, regardless of what I've done in my draft so far. So definitely try to get these players wherever you can to help your fantasy season so far. A reminder again, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. And also the limited time offer at PFF Plus, $79.99 for a year-long PFF subscription if you are a new subscriber. So definitely take advantage of that. That'll get you access to the rankings and all of my articles, which should be a huge help to your fantasy football season. I hope you've been enjoying training camp. We are officially in a preseason time of year, so enjoy the preseason games. And until next time, peace out.